All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are live once again. This is Danny, the Truthstorian, Decoded, Part 2, Paul Cuffe's Revenge. You'll see why in just a little bit why I have titled this as such. Greetings, Lil Yost. Why I've titled this as such. There is a method to my madness. See, these are the talking points of Danny the true historian. I have dubbed him the lie historian because he leaves out um, certain important segments when he's trying to make this declaration as to who's who and what's what and the background of these people. We've already discovered when he mentioned Juan Rodriguez being an African, we know that his mother and father both were in the Caribbean, and that his father was a Portuguese sailor. So that knocks that out of the box. He also did not go on to explain why Juan or Jan Rodriguez did not want to go to Holland, but he chose to come to what we know as North America because he was very affluent in the Indian language, specifically of the Manhattoes, because he ended up in the island of Manhattan. So if we know anything about the Manhattoes, that's a homework assignment. I hope everyone did that last night. But the Manhattoes were the Aborigine or Indian inhabitants of the island known today as Manhattan. So how did uh, Juan Rodriguez, aka Jan Rodriguez, how was he able to speak the language? That's a good question. I'm just asking that amongst myself. How was this able to happen? But we uncovered that on last night's part one. We also talked about breaking down some of these 11 Africans and who they were. But I'm going to go further into depth about this Congo, one that he labeled that had the name of Congo, the surname of Congo. And I am going to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that this gentleman on the ship's log from Congo was not African. We already discussed that Congo wasn't called Congo until here recently, because we do know, again, that Muhammad Ali and George Foreman, the rumble in the jungle, float like a butterfly, sting like a bee, rumble, young man, rumble, was in Zaire. So prior to Congo being named Congo, dubbed Congo, it was named Zaire. So where did this term Congo come from? We're going to talk about that today as well. Like I say, I promise you, I'm not going to keep you long at all. But just doing a recap on who these people were and getting back to uh, Peter Stuyvesant. We spoke about him, and because he mentioned him earlier about it and his peg leg and the whole nine of him being a pirate, and that he never goes into depth on who this Dutch West Indian company is, this cargo company is. But we left off and we were mentioning about Anthony Johnson and the relation to Anthony Johnson to Danny the True Historian and why he's only giving you half truths. So let's pick up where we left off. I'm going to let this clip play for a little bit. I moved the time back just a little bit, and we're going to get into um, again these first 11 Africans that were Atlantic Creoles. And it's amazing to me that he mentioned about Atlantic Creole, but then the Creole within itself is telling you that these are mixed race or mixed group of people. So how are these what we would call pure Africans, fresh off the boat Africans? He's not telling you about the terminology. On the piece that you can see now that I'm about to play, it says some of the first 11 Africans were Atlantic Creoles. But then then he goes on to keep saying they are Africans. But then he's mentioning within the definition of being a Creole, they cannot be African. They cannot be 100% African. And even those that were coming over here that were labeled as African, you're going to find out that they were actually Creoles and mulattoes. So we have Jan.
Of New York City was what? Juan Rodriguez. He was an Atlantic Creole. Now, these first 11 Africans were owned by the company, not the colonists. They were put to work what agriculture, which is tobacco and farming, and municipal work. They built Fort Amsterdam, they built Wall Street, and used for cutting wood. Here goes proof of this primary source. This is from the 1600s. It says Jacob Stuyvesant was an overseer of the Negroes belonging to the company, constantly employed with said Negroes in the building of Fort Amsterdam, which was completed in the year 1635. There is your primaries when we say that Africans built New York. Here is the proof. All right. So that's part of it. So we got them building the fort. 1639 is the year, as we see. Let's keep going. So it's talking about more of them building the fort that we speak of and that we saw. This is that fort in Fort Amsterdam. That long street leading up to it is Broadway. And this is where Wall Street is. In fact, there used to be an actual wall on Wall Street, and Africans built it. The wall was to protect the Dutch from the English and also the Native Americans. Africans built Wall Street. It's just not fancy talk. But there's a sign in Wall Street that tells you nothing about the Africans building that wall and protecting the city. We need to do something about that as well. So this tells you when we
See, I
go
want to
on that the
stop right
Africans
there.
were
You hear how he wants to interchange greetings, EJ Copper, Tony. As you notice, he wants to continue to exchange Negro for African, Negro for African. And if you listen to Cab, the Grand Rising show, we've already shown that Arabians were called Negro and Indians over here in the Americas were called Negro. So you cannot exchange or interchange Negro and African. See how he's playing these word games? That's where it starts of playing these word games and mentioning that Africans built Wall Street. The reason why there's no mentioning of Africans building Wall Street because Africans did not build Wall Street. It was Indians that built Wall Street. That is why at the base of Broadway, as he mentioned before, it is the Museum of the American Indian, not the African American Museum, but the Museum of the American Indian. He wants to keep playing these word games, but I got you. And that's why he keeps saying, oh, these Negroes, these Negroes, these Negroes. He's reading from the book, but he's trying to he's pulling the trick that former President George W. Bush did. If you say something repetitively, it becomes the truth. When he said, Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. Iraq 9/11. Iraq 9/11. Iraq 9/11. So everybody equated, yeah, let's go get Saddam Hussein for 9/11, and not mentioning that it was Egyptians and Saudis that did it. Oh man. See how they work it when you say something. It's like listening to a song on the radio that you can't stand, and you keep hearing it over and over and over and over every 45 minutes on your radio station, and you start humming the song or singing the song. You be like, man, and people are saying, I thought you didn't like that song. And you say, oh, it's stuck in my head. It's the same game that he's playing. The same game. Cobb, I see you. Unmute yourself. It's the same word game. He's trying to exchange Negroes and Africans. Oh man, we're gonna have to tell y'all about. I'll tell y'all a little later about the interaction we had with Axel Foley, aka Lex Vortex. Last night, man, this guy right here, man, I'm telling you, Axel Foley, man, I don't know what to do with him. But I'm gonna go ahead and let this keep playing out. Y'all listen, keep listening there. We just recapping it. We gonna come back and really get into the meat of the matter.
Tobacco farmers in New York City. See, the plantation is 750 pounds of well inspected tobacco, but in case one or both of the Negroes should happen to die during the lease shall receive a rebate. Whatever. Throwing that they were tobacco farmers because New York City was tobacco farms. Here goes a map. It says Africans in New York, Amsterdam lived in the town right with the colonists. They live in a place called the Negro's house. This is the 1600s. This is the primary source. So now to watch this part. Now, those first 11 Africans, like I mentioned, lived in the Negro's house. This is where the foundation of the black community in New York City forms. Guess who was their neighbor? The neighbor was a man named Abraham Riken. Abraham Riken is the great ancestor of a family called the Riker family, who had a place that we know of called Rikers Island. There was a historical note that the Negroes here had a vegetable garden. This is the 1640s, mind you, that a vegetable garden.
Oh, I just had to stop it right there because what he's trying to paint in this picture when they're talking about houses, it is what Brother Bones and I were talking about last night with Axel Foley. These aren't houses like you think of a house, just a one structure. These are lot parcels. These are not houses that we think of just one structure. These are parcels of land. So when you're saying Negro house, see how he's going to say or African house. One thing that he keeps messing up on, it says that they were growing tobacco. Tobacco only grows here in the Americas. That's a crop that is indigenous to the Americas. They know nothing. Africans know nothing about growing tobacco. Tobacco was a foreign crop to them. So how are these, if they're Africans, how are they coming and growing tobacco on their parcel of land? Remember, this is about carving up the parcels of land. As you recall, when I was telling you, when they would come over here through the Dutch West Indian Trade Company, that when they would come and tell them that, hey, you have to pay for the voyage, pay for your lodging, pay for your food, pay for your board, the whole nine, pay for the voyage itself. And then you will, after you have paid off your debt, you will receive compensation and get a parcel of land. This is the Negroes' parcel of land. So here's what we're going into when we're discussing their parcel of land. These are all the ones that were assisting in building these forts, building these walls all along New York City. He's trying to play the game, and I can play it right with him. But the thing about it is, he wants to play tennis, but by football rules. So if you hit the tennis ball over with the rack on his side, he can just scoop it on the bounce and run it back over the net and slam it down and declare he's got the point. This is what he's trying to do. He's trying to play a game with a set of rules on another game because they're not mentioning Africans here. They'll keep talking about Negroes, Negroes, Negroes. And if anyone has done any of their genealogy, you know that some of us Indians, our relatives, were labeled as Negro, and free persons of color, which you will find is also what they were calling these Portuguese. Free persons of color and Negroes. They call them mulattoes. And they say, we can't tell these people apart. The only way they were able to tell these people apart, and that's why I said if you start getting later on into what we call slavery, the only way they could tell the difference between an Indian and someone that was supposed to have been a slave is they would take their shoes if you didn't have shoes on your feet. And you know Indians had shoes on their feet. I already talked about that, about the rubber shoes to the south. In the wintertime, we had the moccasins. So we had shoes. The Africans, not so. West Africans, not so much. But we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But I wanted to bring that portion out on how he's playing the game. These are because who house would be built like that? Look at this. Look at what he has on here on the mount. Let me blow this up so you all can see. Look at this. These are lots. If you go, if you go, uh, if you go to any appraisal district, you will see maps like this on the walls and in the drawers. You have to pull them out, these long maps, and you put them on this big table, and it shows you the lots, the dimensions of the lots. This is not a house. This is a dimension of the lots in New York. See how the roads are there? Look how this other individual's house. Look at this. Look at this house. This lot. No one's house is that large. See what it says Everett? I can't make out the last name. Dyborkin or something. See how large these lots are? They're not houses, they're lots. They're parcels of land that were given to these Negroes, these Indians, and slash Portuguese that came over here, and also the Dutch that came over here that we talked about before, dealing with the Orange Men and their lots. Period. Don't let them fool you. So let's get back to see what he's talking about here. Let's finish this. Let's go ahead and do this. Because I promise you I'm not going to keep you long today. But I just wanted to bring that up.
The Angolans were married with Atlantic Creole. They were godparents
Oh,
to each
sorry about
other's
that.
children.
I
So
didn't
we
hit the
put in
button.
here,
Let me
this is how
rewind
we
it a little
remember
bit
my
so we can catch up.
Steve's married his Steve, and that's one of the Wu-Tang expressions, right? This is how that community grew, because they married amongst each other, and so we got his records, right? We have John Primero, we got his records. We got Big Manuel. It tells you about him and his children and his record, as well as Juan of Fort Orange. We can go on with more, but we'll get to them in a second. So we have the records, who they are, what their names were, who the children, who they married, and the whole bit. And we got even more. Stay tuned. First 11 joined or baptized in the Dutch church. We have records of that, primary records. This is the formation of the Black community, and we'll see why. So they married among each other. The Congolese married the Angolans were married with Atlantic Creole. They were godparents to each other's children. So we put in here, this is how
See, what y'all gonna get out of this is I wanted to pause it right there for a reason, because he's skipping over these families and who they married, and we'll do that in part three. But he's skipping over these families and who they married and all this stuff and how they were godparents to each other and intermarrying within this group. But I'm going to show you that Congo, again, I already told you that was Zaire, wasn't Congo. So you're going to find out who are these Congo people that he's referring to. And when you do it, they don't call me doo-doo for nothing. It's going to make him poop his pants when I show who are these Congos that he's talking about. Angola, we've already discussed. Your Angolans are your Portuguese. They are a mixed group. They are a Creole group. They are Portuguese coming from the continent known today as Africa, but they are Portuguese. And he talks about the Atlantic Creole. See how he leaves that out? Atlantic Creole is referring to the Caribbean. These are Indians coming from the Caribbean islands that had French influence. We've already discussed how the Huguenots were already over here in the Americas prior to all of this happening. This is how they try to get you tied up. So keep following the breadcrumbs. And I wanted to pause it right there because but we're going to come back to where he skipped all over all those names and the families and who they married and intermarried and why these people were intermarrying with each other and not blending in with the other people that were there. There's a reason for that. There's a reason for that. And as some were discussing on last night, man, y'all got to go back. I hope he doesn't. I hope he doesn't get rid of the tape. But Axel Foley, because I'm gonna tell you right now, Axel, I know you're listening. I'm gonna rip that recording from last night, and I'm gonna break it down into segments so people can really hear what you're trying to do on this spiel on who was West African and who's not. I told you. I told you, you used to hanging out on the corner, yelling at each other to the top of your lungs, and they say whoever yells the loudest, that's the winner. I'm sorry. It is about delivery. It's about flow. It's about passion. If you know anything about hip hop, when they had the ciphers back in the day, it's about all the above. What are the elements? Well, I say again, the five elements of a civilization. What are the five elements of hip hop? Anyway, didn't mean to go off on a tangent right there. But I want you all to see what is really going on here and how he's trying to break it down. And then he gave a clip talking about that there was someone writing in the ecclesiastical letters, writing about these Angolans being thieves, lazy, and all this and that, and blah, blah, blah. That he got three women because he wanted three wives, three Portuguese wives, and they wasn't having it. So he sent his displeasure to the Dutch because it was the Dutch company that transferred them over. This is what you get into modern day mail order brides. Remember they used to have, oh, you want a beautiful Russian bride? Then you just send this money to blah, 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 and we'll ship her to your door. This was the oranges of this. Come on, son. This is what they were doing. They were getting mail order brides because there was not enough women over here to their standards that was going to sit down and bow down to the things that they were doing. So they thought that these Portuguese women were going to come over here and bow down to them, and come to find out, nope, not going to be able to do it. So he wanted to ship them back and get his money back. But too bad, so sad. Well, let's continue on with this video because, like I said, we only have about 34 more minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the play button here.
how we remember my steeds marry his steed, and that's one of the Wu-Tang expressions, right? This is how that community grew because they married amongst each other, and so did their children, right? So here goes the records. These are from the actual Dutch records of baptisms and who were the godparents of each other's children. And you can see some of the names. You can see Jan Francisco. It says Neggers right here. If you look on the left, Susanna de Angola, Negrine. On the right, you have Samuel Angola and Emmanuel Angola, and who his godparents are, Marie de Angola. You have John the Four Orange, who was black, and his godparents, who was Simon Congo and Isabel the Angola, meaning that they married amongst each other and they're godparents of each other's children, taking care of them. This is the 1630s that we are doing this. So this family is further records, and there are further records. I won't read them all now due to time, but there we go. All of them marrying each other, having baptizing, and having being godparents for what though? And it states that they're from Angola, Congo, or whatever, so should not be any confusion about their origin. But here is the kicker before we go crazy. This is important to remember. Africans joined and got baptized as a way to get freedom. This is coming from the reverends themselves. It says, as to baptisms, the Negroes occasionally request that we baptize their children, partly because of the worldly and perverse aims on the part of the said Negroes. They wanted, this is, I'm going to be clear, they wanted nothing else than to deliver their children from bodily slavery without striving for piety and Christian virtue. They were doing this to get them and their children free. They knew that they had to say, yes, I like sweet baby Jesus as one of the steps in order for them to get free. And even the reverends knew that this was the fun plan. This is primary evidence of that out of their mouth of how we used Christianity. So here goes this point of them adopting each other's children. This is, of course, another primary source that we have. It says this Negro has been identified as Anthony from Angola, and it goes on to say that when the parents died, that the Angolas fought. She says they stood godmother of their little son Anthony. Anthony and Lucy died soon after, and the child was immediately adopted by Dorothy. This is the 1640s, and we're taking care of each other even when parents die. This is this is the unit, this is the foundations of the Africans in New York. And this history has all been hidden from us. But we're going to get even further to show you what they hid from us. So they formed a secret society. Watch what I tell you. The first 11 Africans in New Amsterdam formed a secret society and took a pledge of one for all and all for one. That's a brand Nubian quote. And so what do I mean by that? Here goes the proof. Let me just run through this quick. There was a big incident. It says 1641, there's a murder that took place. This is actual facts. It says to those who were superstitiously disposed and whose anticipations of the future receiving the coloring from
I'm
blah blah
sorry,
blah blah.
but he tried to throw in see these hip hop references as he did earlier. Um, it's not showing anything about dealing with Negro and being interchanged with Africa. But see how he threw in a Wu Tang quote, and now he's throwing in a brand Nubian quote. That is what he's saying. All for one and one for all. That is a French quote. Alexander Dumas, who wrote the Three Musketeers. Hmm. See how they playing the game? He wants to keep playing these games because people don't do their research. He wants to quote brand Nubians all for one and one for all. That is a French phrase that they used. Come on, son. See, we're gonna keep playing these games, but I'm tired of playing games with Danny the Truthstorian, aka Danny the Lie Storian. But I'm gonna stop right there, and I'm gonna do this for a reason, because now it's gonna get into. He mentioned the secret societies, but let's go back and let's deal with Anthony Johnson, shall we? Let's talk about this Anthony Johnson. Let's pull him up. Pull up this Anthony Johnson. Remember where we left off and was sharing before about Anthony Johnson being an actual uh, indentured servant, in that he I didn't mean to click on that. In that this indentured servant was actually to pay for the voyage and he gained his freedom. So when he was gaining his freedom, again we have the cashier's suit where he mentions that he is was released from servitude. He was legally recognized as a free Negro. See, they keep trying to interchange African slaves with Negro. Negro was a classification of free persons of color. Free persons of color. So he's wanting to keep playing these games. And he's mentioning here that once he made Anthony Johnson made his declaration about the Kaiser suit, it says here, finding that Anthony Johnson still owned Jason Kaiser, the court ordered that he be returned with the court dues paid by Robert Parker. Said this was the first instance of a judicial determination in the 13 colonies holding that a person who had committed no crime could be held in servitude for life, for perpetuity. This was the reason for writing the 13th Amendment. Had nothing to do with those that were south of the Mason-Dixie line, because when that amendment, and the Declaration and Proclamation was made, the Confederate States were not Union states. So when they talk about the slaves were free, that only pertained to those that were still part of the Union. And so the 13th Amendment, when it came along after that, when it was stating about the only time that you could be held in servitude, aka a slave, is if you committed a crime. So that's when they started enforcing the Code Noir, the black codes, and Jim Crow South. See, all this stuff starts to tie in after the fact, when it was against the law to be quote unquote black. This is dealing with the northern states, not dealing with the southern states. But anyway, I wanted you all to read that because it wasn't until Anthony Johnson. Anthony Johnson. And then it says here, it said Parker offered Kaiser work and he signed a term of indenture to the planter. Johnson sued Parker in the Northampton court in 1654 for the return of Kaiser. The court initially found in favor of Parker, but Johnson appealed. In 1655, the court reversed its ruling, finding that Anthony Johnson still owed. I want to read that again. The court ordered that he be returned with the court dues paid by Robert Parker, because Robert Parker was giving Kaiser work and making him a free Negro. And Anthony Johnson got mad and said, "No, sir, I own him for life." This is what started slavery in perpetuity. Before that, everyone was indentured servants, meaning that they were labor and they were paid at the end, or they were paid during their labor, because they were given room and board, lodging, food, the whole nine. See, they don't want to tell you all that. They do not want to tell you that. And it says here the significance of the Kaiser suit. The Kaiser lawsuit demonstrates that the culture and the mentality of the planters in the mid 17th century, individuals made assumptions about the society of Northampton County and their place in it. According to historians T.R. Breen and Stephen Ames, Kaiser believed that he could form a stronger relationship with his patron, Robert Parker, than Anthony Johnson had formed over the years with his patrons. Kaiser considered the dispute to be a matter of patron-client relationship, and this wrongful assumption resulted in his losing the case in the court, having the ruling against him. Johnson knew that the local justices shared his basic belief in the sanctity of property. The judge sided with Johnson, although in future legal issues, race played a larger role. The Kaiser case was an example of how difficult it was for Africans who were indentured servants uh, to prevent being reduced to slavery. Most Africans could not read and had almost no knowledge of the English language. Planters found it easy to force them into slavery by refusing to acknowledge their completion of their indentured contracts. This is what happened in Johnson versus Parker. Although two white planners confirmed that Kaser had completed his indentured contract with Johnson, the court still ruled in Johnson's favor. Here's where they're going to come in talking about this African stuff. But we've already read before that the so called Angolans and people from Congo that were coming over here could read and write. Not only could they read and write, they were at least bilingual, if not multilingual. See how it's going? But I wanna delve into something for a reason because you're gonna see how all this comes into play. We're gonna touch on the American Colonization Society and what role this plays. There's the book, but we're gonna get to the book. We don't have time to do that because we still have about 22 minutes. I'm not gonna keep you all long, and I'm not gonna read the whole thing. I'm just gonna kind of paraphrase where it's mentioning that the Society for the Colonization of Free People of Color in America. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because you're gonna find out that the connection between the secret society of these Negroes and the secret society of the American colonization. It said, commonly known as the American Colonization Society, ACS was a group established in 1816 by Robert Finley of New Jersey to encourage the support of migration of free African Americans. See how they changed that? You know, that wasn't in there. That was not the terminology that they used because they know when you use that, it was saying free Negroes or free persons of color. It said to the continent of Africa. It says in 1821 through 1822, the society helped to found the settlements on the Pepper Coast of West Africa as a place to freeborn or manumitted but not fugitive American blacks. This was near Sierra Leone, the already existing British colony for former slaves and free blacks. So I wanted to put that out there. Sierra Leone was established by the British because the British were taking over or trying to take over where the Dutch were. So they were sending people to Africa. They were sending Indians to Africa. That's why I keep asking the question. I keep asking over and over and over on these DNA tests, why is it that no one that they keep saying, oh, you're West African, keep showing up West African, West African. I said, but no West Africans have any DNA that tie them to Indians over here in the Americas? No one's ever asked those questions. So here we go. Let's look at about this where it says that the majority of Black Americans regarded the society with enormous disdain. Let me get my little cursor here so we can read together like they used to do when you were in kindergarten. The majority of the Black Americans regarded the society with enormous disdain. Why would they do that? And I know some people are like, oh no, it's Wikipedia. Because you got something that says you got any sources other than Wikipedia. Let's click on this number because it's got a little one by it. Let's go on down here to this number one. What does it say? Egerton Douglas. That is Douglas Egerton wrote this. Averting a Crisis, the pro-slavery critique of the American colonizational society. And it talks on the Civil War, and it gives you the pages. That it was published in June of 1997. And there go the pages. Like I say, you see all these other references that it's going to give here as you see. Look at all those look at all that. Look at all that. Look at all those references. So if anyone's got any question, when you click on that link, you go to the references, and then you click on that link, and it'll take you to the article. But for time's sake, I don't want to bore you with that. But I wanted to touch on so people go, oh no, you do Wikipedia. Oh no, you can't do that. Oh no, you're cheating. Cobb, unmute yourself. So now we already have that reference. Okay. So now it talks about all those that were saying no. And the one person that they like to use so much, your main man, Frederick Douglass, he had great animosity for the HCS. He hated it because he knew it was a ploy. He was saying that we were Americans. That's why they couldn't get the push like they did. And this is what people don't realize. If you're saying, okay, I'm being mistreated, by the people here on this land, why wouldn't you leave and go to another land that where they said you wouldn't be bothered? They're offering you free voyages. Go back to Africa, quote unquote. But these people weren't going. Why weren't they going? Why weren't they going? So we're gonna find out why they weren't going here in just a minute. But when you start following to the American Colonization Society, you cannot mention I know I'm going very quickly, and I apologize. You cannot get into the American Colonization Society or the ACS without talking about this individual that I'm about to bring up next, Paul Cuffe. Because Danny, the Historian, loves to mention Paul Cuffe. Paul Cuffe tells you when he was born, January 17th, 1759. He died September 7th, 1817. He was born to a free Native American woman and African American family. See how they put that in? On Cuttyhook Island, Massachusetts. And how they keep trying to twist this, because they'll say later on that his dad was a slave but wasn't a slave and all the rest of this stuff. And you're gonna find that Cuffy is just a pronunciation of Cutty Hunk. It's short. Cutty, Cuffy, Cuff. I'm from Cuff. You're gonna find out that these were all the same people. Where he talks about them being Wampanoag. So when you start getting into Wampanoag, you still get back to King Philip's War. You still get back to Crispus Attucks. All this is gonna fall into play. These were Indians. These were Indians. So it said he became a successful businessman, a merchant, a sea captain, a whaler, and an abolitionist. His mother, Ruth Moses, was Wampanoag from Harwich on Cape Cod, and his father was Ashanti. Captured as a child in West Africa and sold into slavery in Newport in 1720. And in the mid 1740s, his father was manumitted by his Quaker master, John Slocum. It's amazing. Quaker and Dutch are synonymous. Remember, you always used to hear me say about those wooden shoe wearing Dutch? Why was he working for this Quaker? Perhaps because the Quakers were the one, these Dutch were the one that brought him to North America. Okay, let's continue. It says he was manumitted by his Quaker master John Slocum in Massachusetts, and his parents were married in 1747 in Dartmouth, Massachusetts. And it goes on to say Cuffy's father died when he was 13. He and his older brother John inherited the family farm. It said with life rights to their mother and resided there with their mother and three younger sisters. Following Cuffy signed on to the 3-year whaling voyages to the West Indies. Cuffy signed on to the first 3 whaling voyages to the West Indies. During the Revolutionary War, Cuffy delivered urgently the needs of goods to the people of Nantucket. I told you it's going to keep following in line on dealing with who was who and what was what. Now you have to go back and look at Crispus Attucks in a different light. And you're going to find a relationship between Paul Cuffe, Crispus Attucks, and King Philip during King Philip's War. King Philip was one of their ancestors, period. Anyway, let's go. And it says that Cuffe delivered urgently needed goods to the people of Nantucket by shipping it through the British naval blockade on a small sailboat. Pardon me. After the war, he built a lucrative shipping business on the Atlantic coast and in parts of the world. He also built his own ships in a boatyard on the Westport River. He established the Westport, Massachusetts. He established in Westport, Massachusetts, the first racially integrated school in North America. But now you're going to find out where Paul Cuffe plays this role in getting into the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812. It said he was a devout Quaker. He made his allegiance to the Dutch West Indian Trading Company. And it says that he joined the first Port Friends meeting in 1808 and often spoke at the Sunday services at the Westport Meeting House and other Quaker meetings in Philadelphia. In 1813, he oversaw the construction and donated half of the money to the new meeting house in Westport that exists to this day. Very few people of color were admitted into the Friends meeting in those years. You're going to find out the connection of these Friends meeting with the American Colonizational Society and this secret society of these Negroes. You're going to find out the connection. But I wanted to go into uh, let's go a little bit because I don't want to waste you all. I don't want to waste too much time here. But I wanted to get into let's go into the shipping where it talks about Michael Weiner, the husband of Mary Slocum, his older sister and 10 years older than Paul. They built their first ship together, a 25-ton schooner, Sunfish, and it was the beginning of a long partnership between the two men and their families. And then he talks about the building of the ships, talks about the properties that he purchased, as we mentioned part of that before. And then it said prior settlements of free blacks in Sierra Leone. It says in the early 19th century, the Englishmen and Anglo Americans believed that the people of African descent were inferior to Europeans. The Second Great Awakening, carried primarily by Quakers, Methodists, Baptists from New England to the South, had motivated some owners to manumit free their slaves after the Revolutionary War, as slavery continued after the Revolution, primarily in the South. Prominent men such as Presidents Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, both slave owners, believed the immigration of free blacks to colonies, either within or outside of the United States, was the easiest and most realistic solution to race problems in America. Remember the difference between immigration with an I and immigration with an E. Now, you seeing the connection here on what's going on. It said attempts to settle American blacks in other parts of the world had to Sierra. The reason being is the British had promised these Indians, you won't have to worry about white people anymore. We'll pay for your voyage to go over to a land and you can cultivate it and do what you want to do. See, they don't have those discussions. I wish I could get into it today, man, but the shot clock is going to get me. I may go in a little bit, about 5 minutes of overtime. But the British had already been making these promises to these Indian Americans, these quote unquote free Negroes and mulattoes, free persons of color. They had already started making these deals with them to say, hey, you help us fight these colonists and we will give you free land. They were already shipping Indians to Sierra Leone, and the war still continues. But like I said, I don't want to read all into that. We could probably break it down at a later time. I told you, I know it's going to be a part 3 and possibly a part 4 to this. But this is entitled appropriately, "The Revenge," Paul Cuffe's Revenge, and he talks about his trips going over to Sierra Leone. And he said the Sierra Leone company sponsored 400 people, mostly known as the Black Poor of London, to resettle in Freetown, Sierra Leone. The Freetown settlements led to the British overlords' struggle to establish a working economy and develop a government that could survive against outside pressures. What would be those outside pressures? After the financial collapse of the Sierra Leone Company, a second group, the newly created African Institution, offered immigration to a larger group of black loyalists who had been resettled in Nova Scotia after the American Revolution. The African Institution London sponsors hope to gain economic return while fostering civilizing trades of educated blacks in America. This is the shipment of these educated blacks going to Africa from Nova Scotia that were already there. This was the deal that the British gave with blacks that were already over here, quote unquote Indians, not Africans, to go to Africa to get a foothold in Africa, on the west coast of Africa. So we know that Sierra Leone was established by the British, and they were sending people from what we call the Western Hemisphere over to Africa. See, you see how you see what they, I'm telling you, it's going to get greater. But Paul, going back to Paul Cuffe, Paul Cuffe starts sending Indians from the Carib and North America to Sierra Leone, and you can read that on your own. I'll put the link. I'll put the link on after I do the video. I'll put the link in there so you can see it for yourselves. But he starts to send these people over to Africa from here. And the connection is, like I say, this is where you start to hear the terminology of Africa. You don't hear all this African talk until this starts with the British sending these poor black movement over to Sierra Leone, and the American Colonizational Society sending these free Negroes and Indians over to West Africa. It doesn't start until then. Now, we're going to get to where the rubber meets the road. Let's have a discussion. Let's talk about, they keep talking about, oh, the African church, the AME, the African church, the AME. Well, let's talk about how the African church, the AME, got its name. How did it get its name? Where did it come from? Well, let's talk about where it came from and how they got their name. Now, let's go to this. Let's go to AME. Let's just do this. That's dealing with the church itself. And talk about the African Methodist Episcopal Church. That's their official website. This right here is their initial logo. But let's get to this. Let's go to this. Let's go to this, shall we? Let's talk about it. Talk about this AME as we're breaking it down. It says the African Methodist Episcopal Church, usually called the AME Church or AME, is a predominantly African American Methodist denomination. Its first independent. It is the first independent Protestant denomination to be founded by black people. It was founded by the Right Reverend Richard Allen in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Notice how we getting again about Pennsylvania and these Quakers again, these wooden shoe wearing Dutch. In 1816, from several black Methodist congregations in the mid Atlantic area that wanted independence from white Methodists. I'm going to stop right there because when you get an opportunity to go back, matter of fact, let's go back and let's do this with Paul Cuffe. Since this is Paul Cuffe's revenge, let's go back and deal with Paul Cuffe and what started here. It says Cuffe's first venture to Sierra Leone in 1811, Paul Cuffe had taken an interest in colonial settlements in Africa. One of his close Quaker friends and business partner, William Roach Sr., had traveled to London shortly after the Revolutionary War. So now do you see the connection between the poor blacks dealing with London and the connection with Paul Cuffe and the American Colonizational Society? Are you seeing the connection here? And it said, and there was much discussion in the government and the press about the first settlement of blacks from England in Sierra Leone. Then Roach returned to America and settled in New Bedford. He may well have told Paul Cuffe about these undertakings. Subsequently, Cuffe wrote as follows: I have for these many years past felt a lively interest in their behalf, wishing the inhabitants of the colony might become established in truth and thereby be instrumental in its promotion amongst our African brethren. He wanted to push this back to Africa, go to Africa movement, but he got a pushback from the quote unquote Negroes that were here. And everybody keep trying to figure out, why would you not want to leave and go back to Africa? Because they were telling him we're not from Africa. And it says, from March 1807 on, Cuffe encouraged the Quaker abolitionist friends in Philadelphia, see here it comes again, Baltimore, and New York City to help the fledgling efforts to improve Sierra Leone. This is why I told you some groups were fighting, other groups were not, but you'll still find out the ties between Great Britain and the Americas never changed. The colonists never changed, because why is he speaking on behalf of the British? And these people, these abolitionists, had no problem with it. See, I want to get into, and I'll do that on down the line, on how the Revolutionary War, how it and the War of 1812 was a cover up to get rid of us, the Indian. Okay, now it said Cuffe mulled over the logistics and chances of success for the movement before deciding in 1809 to join the project. On December 27, 1810, he left Philadelphia on his first expedition to Sierra Leone. Cuffe reached Freetown, Sierra Leone on March 1st, 1811. He traveled the area and investigated the social and economic conditions of the region. He met with some of the colony's officials who were opposed to American commercial vessels coming to Sierra Leone and competing with the English merchants. And this is what leads up to the War of 1812. It was about trying to establish an American colony over in West Africa, because they didn't have it like that. And the British had failed trying to establish a colony over in West Africa of Sierra Leone. It was failing. But I'm going to skip down a little bit. It says Cuffe and the black entrepreneurs together founded the Friendly Society of Sierra Leone as a mutual aid merchant group dedicated to furthering the prosperity and industry among the free peoples in the colony and loosening the stronghold that the English merchants held on trade. You hear Brother Bones talk about it all the time, that it was dealing with labor disputes. Don't let the smooth taste fool you. Greetings to those that just entered the chat. Oak Cliff Tip, I apologize. Brother David Corey, Mama Red. Who else am I miss? Chicago, Fire Spitting Serpent. Man, Chicago Fire. Were you Mrs. O'Leary's cow that kicked over that lamp? What's going on here? Chicago Fire. That's what I think about. But shout out to those that are in the chat. Like I say, I know we're going a little bit over time, and I apologize, but I gotta get this out. I gotta get this out, so when you listen to the rest of Danny the Historian, when we get into part 3 and possibly part 4, you'll have a better backdrop as to why these things are happening. All this stuff is being set up dealing with Anthony Johnson. This is all, everything that he said in the play starts spiraling into where we are now. And it says here, I'll go down a little bit. In the next paragraph said, the invitation of the African institution, Cuffe sailed Great Britain to secure further aid for the colony, arriving in Liverpool on July 1811. He was warmly received by the heads of the African institution in London, and they raised some money for the Friendly Society, these secret societies. See, you never heard about the Friendly Society, probably not until today. He was granted government permission and license to continue his mission in Sierra Leone. He played with the English officials. He stayed with the English officials and merchants of London and Liverpool, who were the most hospitable and respectful of his intelligent, dedicated, and hardworking American Quaker black merchant who was full of positive ideas about what might be done to improve the colony of Sierra Leone and bring development to the African people. Encouraged by his support, Cuffe returned to Sierra Leone, where he and black settlers solidified the role in the friendly society. And refined the development plans for the colony, including a grist mill, sawmill, and rice processing factory and salt works. I asked Axel Foley, Brother Bones and I both last night, what did these West Africans build? And they built a lot of things. What did they build? Well, they built a lot of things. Again, what did they build? Because you just read here that Paul Cuffe was using his ships that were affiliated with the Dutch West Indian Company to bring them supplies and bringing them crops for them to build do salt works and rice processing factory. Schwarzenegger in his house, Alton Clayton Powell, aka Schwarzenegger. Greetings. You see that? You see that? And it says here, embargo, the president, and the War of 1812. That's why I want to tell you, don't take my word for it. Relations between the United States, Great Britain was strained, and in 1811 ended. The U.S. established an embargo on British goods, including goods from the colonies, including Sierra Leone. This affected the U.S. transatlantic trade as well with trade with Canada. When Cuffe reached Newport, Rhode Island on April 1812, his ship, the Traveler, was seized by U.S. Customs agents along with the goods. Officials could not release his cargo, so Cuffe went to Washington, D.C. to appeal. He was able to meet with the Secretary of Treasury, Albert Gallatin, and President James Madison. Whoa. President James Madison, which was a part of the ACS, because Madison knew what Cuffe was doing when shipping Indians over to Africa. Because if you shipping Indians out of here, because the people called these Indians agitators, get these agitators out of here. See how they keep playing? They want to keep playing, so I'm going to keep playing the game with them. Madison warmly welcomed Cuffe to the White House. This may have been the first time an African American, here we go with this African American stuff again, had been the guest in the White House. Deciding that Cuffe had not intentionally violated the embargo, Madison ordered his cargo returned to him. The revenge of Paul Cuffe. But I wanted to skip down a little bit, and I wanted to go here. It said Cuffe intended to return to Sierra Leone regularly, but in June 1812 the war started. As a Quaker pacifist, Cuffe opposed the war on moral grounds. No, he didn't oppose the war on moral grounds. It cut into his pockets. That's why he opposed the war, because he had already made a relation with the poor, the poor blacks of London, these African societies and these secret societies in London. So it was cutting into his pockets. It had nothing to do with morals. Greetings, Brother Copper Indio. It had nothing to do with morals. And then he goes on, and I'm going to say that I'll read this last sentence of this section here. It said, the war caused Cuffe to lose ships, and he suffered financially. See how that goes? It said, and the hero was declared not seaworthy while in Chile and never returned home. See what he was doing? He's shipping goods and people from the Americas over to Sierra Leone. Because where's Chile? Where is Chile? Okay, John James of Philadelphia, his managing partner in the Alpha, was losing money in the ship's operations. Fortunately, the war ended with the Treaty of Ghent and at the end of 1814. After getting his finances in order, Cuffe prepared to return to Sierra Leone. Then it goes on to talk about the later years, and it talks about on his return to Africa in 1816, Cuffe exhibited to the New York chapter of the African Institution of the Certificates of the landing of those colonists in Sierra Leone. He also has also received from Governor McCarthy a certificate of steady and sober conduct of the settlers since the arrival, and the acknowledgement of $439.62 advanced to them since they landed to promote their comfort and advantage. But I want to read about his death. Let's go on to Paul Cuffe's death. It says death and legacy. In early 1817, Cuffe's health deteriorated. He never returned to Africa, and he died in Westport of September 1817. His final words were, "Let me pass quietly away." Cuffe left an estate of an estimated value of $20,000, equivalent to $313,708 in 2018, and he bequeathed property and money to his widow, siblings, children, grandchildren, a poor widow, and the Friends of Meetings House in Westport. He was buried in his graveyard behind Westport Friends Meeting House, and his wife later buried next to him. Why was he buried there in the at Westport Friends Meeting House? Oh man, we can talk about that a little bit later. Said a crowd of more than 200 friends, relatives, and admirers gathered to the ceremony, and his longtime friend and contemporary William Roach delivered one of the eulogies at the event. The following month, the Reverend Peter Williams Jr. offered an extended eulogy at the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church in New York. This is where we get to the AME and the founding of the AME and the reason why the AME was founded, and how they keep talking about, oh, these African traditions, we got these African garb and all of this. This was all started along with Paul Cuffe going to Africa, seeing how they were doing things, and then all of a sudden it's a push to go to Africa. It's a push to go to Africa. So let's go back, because remember I told y'all about the Congo, and then I'm wrapping up here. Y'all give me about 6 more minutes. We talked about the AME. I wish I could go into more depth about the ANE, but you see the connection with the AME and the connection with Paul Cuffe and the connection with the ACS and all of this. Go back to Africa, and there was a push from several Indian leaders over here that said we're not African. So why could they not get the support of all these people going back to Africa? Because they weren't from Africa. But let's get into Congo and discover who was called Congo. If y'all are ready and y'all can still hear me out there, y'all give me a one, please. Because I don't want this part to be lost in translation. Danny, the Truthstorian, you're done, dude. As far as this category, you may want to go open up a little African park somewhere, but tell people the truth. You can get one tree and one bench, because that's all parks are in New York, because they really don't have parks. They got one bench and one tree, and they call it a park with no grass. I don't know how that works, but no grass. So let's read this. I'm going to take my time. Let's read this. I hope everybody's still there. Oh, man, let me get this bigger. I need this to be bigger. Because I'm going to get this, man. I want y'all to see this, man. Y'all see that? Okay, let's get it at 175, because I really want y'all to see this with me. Y'all see this? It says here, Americo Liberians. So we already know under the American Colonizational Society, or the ACS, that they were sending Indians to what they call Liberia. And we know that because we already discussed on CAB, Grand Rising Show, about the connection on the Monroe Doctrine. Is get rid of these agitators and ship them out of here. And it says here, Americo Liberians are Congo people, or the Congo people in Liberian English, are a Liberian ethnic group of African American, see how they try to throw that in, Afro Caribbean, and liberated African descent. The sister ethnic group of Americo Liberians are the Sierra Leone Creole people. What? Sierra Leone Creole people who share similar ancestry and related culture. Americo Liberians can trace their ancestry to freeborn and formerly enslaved. See, I try to throw that freeborn and then formerly enslaved African Americans who migrated in the 19th century to become the founders of the state of Liberia. They identified there as Americo Liberians. Some African Americans, in more common sense the term following the sentiment in Canada, also participate in the founding settlers of Sierra Leone, which we know dealing with the British, and the Cote de l'Ivoire. Although the terms Americo Liberian and Congo had distinct definitions in the 19th century, they are currently interchangeable and refer to an ethnic group composed of descendants of various free and ex-slave, here they go, African Americans, Caribbean, recaptive, and Sierra Leone Creoles who settled in Liberia in 1822. Later in Liberia, these African Americans, again, let's just say Indians, integrated 5,000 liberated Africans called Congos, former slaves of the Congo Basin, who were freed by British and American from slave ships after the prohibition of the African slave trade. Here we go again because we know that the British were shipping Indians in Canada and Indians in the Caribbean to Sierra Leone. These were not Africans that they freed. Come on, son. We're not doing this today. We're not going to do this today. We're not going to do this today. And it says here that, 5,000 Barbadian, Barbadian, Barbadian. Let's click on Barbadian right quick. Let's do that. Let's just do that. It says Barbadians, are the people who identify with the country of Barbados. Uh oh. Barbadians. That's what I keep trying to tell you. Barbadians were shipped to Sierra Leone and Liberia. Not by accident. See how they keep trying to throw this in here? And it says Americo Liberians rarely intermarried with the indigenous West Africans. And that place is still in conflict today because of it. Through Western literature and the discourse of the United States and the United Kingdom, the use of the term Americo Liberians, this term is outdated and in common with parlance of the majority of Liberians, including the Americo Liberian people themselves and neighboring West Africans, such as Sierra Leoneans, refer to the Americo Liberian people as Congo. They refer to them as Congo. And I wish I had time, but the shot clock got me. I'll do it on part three. But I hope everyone had an opportunity to at least get something out of part two of Danny, the Truthstorian, Decoded, Paul Cuffe's Revenge. Because we're going to pick up on there in a little bit. That's when they started being called Congo. But you're going to find out that Congo coincides, as I said yesterday, with Chongo, and you're going to find out Chongo was the name that was given to the Monkey tribe. And I wish I had Brother Kerry Bay up in here so he could tell you Monkey. The Monkey tribe, and I told you they went to Virginia and were now named the Poomonkeys of Northern Virginia. They did not start using the term Congo until these American Indians got over there. Congo was never used. So who was the guy that Danny, the Lostorian, said that his surname is Congo? Replace it with Chongo. Look up the Monkey tribe, the Pamonkey, and lead you to the Monkey tribe. Come on, son. Let's stop playing these games. Do not fall for the okey doke. They were not called the Congo, which is why I say again that the Congo was called Zaire, rumble in the jungle. The champ is here. The champ is here. The champ is here. Zaire. Come on, son. It was recently called the Congo, and then you're gonna get into the conflict where it says about these Americo Liberians were taken over. They came over and they were taken over, and those that were in West Africa didn't like it, which is why you still got conflicts in Sierra Leone. You still got conflicts in Liberia because you had the people, the foreigners that came over that had no relation with these West Africans, came and took over because they brought in their same system that they were using with the Europeans. That is why they are still fighting today. But before I end, let's go. I got to go this last section here. I don't want to do this. It says the colonists and the descendants led the political, social, cultural, economic sectors of the country. They ruled the new nation from the 19th century until 1980 as a dominant minority. Man, that sounds a little bit like the United States of America, doesn't it? You got the dominant minority running everything. From 1878 to 1980, the Republic of Liberia was a de facto one party state ruled by both the indigenous and the Americo Liberian dominated True Whig Party and the Masonic Order of Liberia. We'll get into the rest at a later date, but I wanted to put that out there. Danny, the Truthstorian, is a part of the same push. That's why he always throws Paul Cuffe up and never mentions that Paul Cuffe was an Indian. They say, oh, his dad was Ashanti, but he inherited the land because of what? His mama is Wapanag. They keep mentioning these people's names, but they're not mentioning. They can say, oh, these are Africans. These are Africans. I already told you about Juan, Jan, Rodriguez, about his daddy was Portuguese. See all this starts coming into play, and we ain't figured it out. And then they can tell you, oh, Sierra Leone, Ghana, oh, Congo, you're South African Bantu. You were a hunter-gatherer. Come on, son. Hunter-gatherer equates to you being a primate. That everywhere the food moves, you move. But yet we know our people were cultivators. So why are you trying to get primates to come over to the Americas and be cultivators? That's not going to work. If the majority of you are South African Bantu hunter-gatherers, what do you know about cultivating anything? What do you know about growing crops? How do you know about dealing with sugar? How do you know about dealing with tobacco? How do you know about squash and pumpkins and corn? How do you know about that if you're a hunter-gatherer? Come on, son. Ask Foley if you're not listening, because I know you probably want to know this listening, but not in the chat. I'm going to send you the link to this because I keep asking you over and over. And Brother Bones did it very diplomatically because you know I'm very abrasive. When I kept asking you, we both kept asking you, what did they build? What did they build? What did they build in West Africa? But you already see that in Liberia, they set up the True Whig Party. Could someone say Whiggamore Party? Oh man, we keep going back to these same parties that you find in the early colonies of what was known as the United States. Come on, man. We can't follow the breadcrumbs. We can't see the connection between the American Colonization of Society, the African Methodist Episcopal Church, and you're going to find out dealing with the Methodist Church and how this goes back to both sides. It deals with the Protestant of the church, and the Episcopal deals with the Catholic Church because the Protestants and the Catholics both agreed on one thing: get these Indians off these lands in the Americas so we can dominate it. We could be at war with each other all day long, Protestants and Catholics, but we do agree that these Indians are agitators. Man, I wish I could go into more detail. I'll cover that in part 3. You don't have to take anything that I say, but I promise you, I'm going to keep bringing you sources. I'm going to keep bringing you proof, and you can look it up for yourself, but you'll find out that the Catholic Church and the Protestant Church combined forces to ship Indians to West Africa. I'm gonna let everybody go. Enjoy your Sunday. And once again, I keep saying, I keep saying, and I keep saying, and I keep saying, keep falling for the okey doke if you want to. I'm not gonna fall for it. I'm not gonna fall for it. Danny, the lie historian, I've seen your lies. I see through your lies. I've already dealt with this before, and I'll deal with it again. That you're gonna see that there is a pattern and there is a method to this push of everything being African American. They want to keep putting African in front of stuff to tie you into a place that you don't belong. Because it's already said, it's amazing, all these people coming over there, but those that came from the Americas, it said the indigenous people of West Africa had a problem with them. Why did they have a problem with them? Because they knew they were not the same people. And you still get it to this day. And like I said again, why is it that no West Africans have any Indian, American Indian DNA show up in their results? Explain that to me. Because I really want to know. I really want to know. And every time I try to have those conversations with those in that group of MBK, which is Danny the Lie Historian and Wrongborn and all the rest of them and Barfield A. Greed, they keep hitting me with Keith Sweat. There you go, telling me no again. There you go. Hey, with that, I'm going to allow y'all to enjoy y'all Sunday and y'all do what y'all do. And again, y'all take care of yourselves and each other. I'm out.